Hello everyone, welcome to our story writing module. The very first video that we have in this module is about certain do's and don'ts that you absolutely must commit to memory when it comes to story writing. Now we have covered a lot of do's and don'ts before, but those were about the general essays that you had to write. A descriptive essay, a narrative essay, an argumentative essay, those were about those types of essay basically. But this is story writing, and the way you write a story is very, very different from the way you might write a descriptive or a narrative or an argumentative essay. So we have a completely separate section, a completely separate video on the do's and don'ts that you absolutely need to remember when it comes to story writing. Number one, keep it short. The plot must be tight, just like your tight word limit. Your story has to be short but very, very effective. Just because you have a flair for writing and you find that you have a lot of time left at your disposal after having finished the paper, do not write a 1500 or 2000 word story. That's going to be a big mistake because you have to write within the word limit that has been given to you. You can exceed the word limit by 10%, but not more than that. Treat it like a very short story. However, never write less than 350 words. Always write more than 350 words. Try to keep it within 450 words, or at least try to hit the 400 word mark. So you have to keep it short, but keep this in mind, you cannot make it too short. Number two, have a definite plot. You should have a definite plot when it comes to story writing. A proper introduction, a proper body, and a proper conclusion is very, very necessary. Your body can be divided into 2 to 3 paragraphs. That's completely alright, but your introduction and your conclusion and your body has to be very, very distinct from one another. A definite beginning, a definite middle, and a definite end, they are also very, very important. And most importantly, there has to be a logical connection between your paragraphs. All the events and incidents that you're mentioning in your story, they should have a necessary and logical connection with the events that come before or after a particular event. All the events should be connected. There should be a cause and an effect. The causality should be maintained at all cost. No irrelevant details are allowed. If you find yourself focusing too much on a particular incident that doesn't have any significant role to play in your story, that doesn't contribute to the plot in any significant way, I would suggest please do not include that incident or that event in your story. It's completely unnecessary and you're not going to get any marks on that. Only the details that play a relevant role, a significant role that contributes to your plot, only those incidents should be mentioned. Number three, have a very powerful ending. Once again, the ending is the very last thing that your examiner will read before the examiner marks your entire story. So, the ending plays a very, very important role. The ending of a story is super important, maybe even more important than the introduction. It has to be logical, to the plot, and also impactful. The ending should make sense. Even if you're having surprise endings or plot twists right at the end of your story, make sure they follow smoothly and naturally, and they should have some logic behind them. If you are planning on a surprise ending, leave at least a couple of clues in your story that a reader can connect to once they have finished reading your story. So when they look back after finishing your story with the surprise ending, when they look back at your story, they can connect the dots. So leave a few clues that lead to the surprise ending within your body so that the reader can connect the dots after having finished reading your story. Number 4, have more than 2 characters in your story. If you want to get good marks in your story, it's a very, very important rule that you have to have more than 2 characters. 3 to 4 characters are sufficient. However, these characters have to play significant roles in your story. You cannot just have 2 characters playing significant roles and then just introduce another 2 characters, maybe a sister or a friend, and then have them do nothing at all. If you are adding 2 extra characters, make them have significant roles, make them play significant roles and contribute to the main plot. You cannot just bring them in just to increase the number of your characters. You have to give them very specific and meaningful roles. Number 5, a single focus is very, very important. Since what you're writing is a very short story, having one single focus is of utmost importance. Do not complicate your story by bringing in several subplots. One single definite main plot is more than enough for story writing. Develop the single main plot as much as you can without bringing in irrelevant subplots. Focus on the characters, setting, dialogues, conflict, and flow of the story instead. We are going to discuss about all of these major elements of a story in our subsequent videos, and do not worry, we have a lot of examples to provide to you to clear your doubts. So, we will talk about dialogue, setting, character, conflict, flow, and there won't be any problem at all. So, instead of introducing a variety of subplots which are totally unnecessary to your main plot, focus on the one single main plot, embellish it with strong characters, beautiful settings, effective dialogues, a very strong conflict, and a smooth and graceful flow. Number 6, and this is something you must avoid. Try and avoid ending your story with a dream unless it is asked in the question. Many students in the past have done this, which is why I think I must mention it, and not just mention it, but also emphasize on it. They have written extremely fanciful plots, beautiful stories, plots that seem to befit crime thrillers and supernatural thrillers, but then they end their stories with the character waking up from sleep. Try and avoid that as much as you can. It is an overused trope, and it also defeats the purpose of your entire story. However, if the ending line is given to you in the question and it specifically demands that a character is waking up from sleep or waking up from a dream, then you must absolutely go ahead with it, but not otherwise. Try and avoid this trope of ending your story with the character waking up from a dream. The next point is, do not plagiarize. Now, what is the meaning of plagiarize? Plagiarism is basically intellectual property theft when you steal from other sources without citing the source. Now, whenever you're asked to write a story, the topic usually reads like, write an original short story. So the word original is very, very important here. It means that the story has to be your own, something that you have created, something that you have come up with, not some other person. You might have read a lot of books, you might have watched a lot of movies and web series, but you cannot copy or borrow ideas from those sources and replicate them in your story. You cannot befool your examiner, because remember one thing, your paper is not just corrected by one examiner, but after the corrections, it also goes for a round of scrutiny where your plagiarism might be caught. And in such cases, usually the entire essay or the entire story is cancelled. Yes, cancelled. You do not even get 1 mark for that. You get a 0 if you're caught in your act of plagiarism. So be very, very careful. Do not copy from any other source. Do not just change the setting or the names of your characters and write the same story that you found in some movie or in some book that you've read. Do not make that mistake unless you want your entire story to be cancelled. The next point is, avoid using too many dialogues in your story. Use of dialogues is a must when it comes to story writing. Dialogues are a specific element of story writing that you cannot ignore. However, you should not overuse your dialogues. Do not develop your story entirely based on dialogues. Your story should comprise both narrative passages that reflect the voice of the author, the narration of the author, and then a few dialogues to complement those narrative passages. Do not write your story entirely based on dialogues or entirely as a series of letters, emails, chats, etc. This kind of an epistolary form of writing, a writing that is developed through letters, emails, this is allowed when you are writing for magazines or newspapers, when you are writing a novel, but not when you are writing a story, especially for your school or for ICSE exams. So, do not choose that format. Your story should have a specific introduction, a specific body, and a specific conclusion, and it should be a combination of narrative passages and dialogues. You can use a few letters, a few chats, a few emails, but use them within the body of your story. Do not overuse them. You can use a few, maybe 3 or 4 letters, emails, etc. A little more of dialogues, but do not overuse them or base your story entirely on them. The next point is, do not change the beginning and ending lines that are given to you in the topic of the story. In ICSE, either the beginning or the ending lines of a story are given. You're usually familiar with the topics. Write an original short story that begins with, "Oh, I wish I had paid heed to my mother's warning," or end with a line like this. So, when you are beginning your story or ending your story with these lines, write them exactly as they are given in the topic. You cannot change even a letter or a punctuation mark. Do not change any letter. If you have certain letters in capital letters, certain letters in the lowercase, certain letters in the uppercase, you cannot change them. You have to write them exactly as they are. So, do not change punctuations, do not change capital letters or small letters when you are replicating those lines in your story. You should replicate those lines exactly as they are given to you. Number 9, do not change the point of view in the middle of your story. You cannot have multiple narrators in your story because what you are writing is a very short story. Change of narration is acceptable when you are writing novellas or novels, but not a short story. And especially if that short story is for your board exams. It is not acceptable at all. There can only be one narrator and one point of view. That narrator can be a first-person narrator or an omniscient third-person narrator. That's all right. But the narrator has to remain the narrator throughout the story. You cannot have another narrator jumping in. So, do not shift narrators or introduce other points of view in your story. If you are the narrator of your story, you should remain the narrator from the beginning to the end. Your friend or any other character in the story cannot suddenly barge in and assume the role of the narrator. That would be very, very wrong. The last point is, do not forget to title your story. It is quintessential that you title your story because the title carries marks. Do not forget that. So, never ever forget to title your story. Make a title that is relevant to your story, that is relevant to what you have written without giving away the ending. Remember, the topic that is given to you and the title, they are two different things. You cannot write the topic as your title. You cannot write the topic as your title. I repeat, many students make this mistake. They just write the topic and then they right away start their story. No, the topic is not your title. You have to write a separate title, a title that you have to come up with. So, do not get confused between the topic and the title. The topic is given to you in your question paper and the title is something that you have to make, that you have to create based on your plot. That's all for this video. Hope you found this video useful. See you again in the next video, where we are going to learn about the different kinds of essay topics that you may find in your ICSE English language question papers.